Speaker, it is a great privilege to speak for the first time for the backbenches for over a decade, following two extremely powerful speeches from both sides on the front bench. And I want to thank both the Minister of State and the Shadow Minister for two extremely compassionate, understanding speeches that talked about the sheer pain felt by so many families up and down the country. And I also want to thank the many honourable members on all sides, the honourable member for Eddisbury, for Colchester, for Banbury, for Washington and Sunderland West, and many others who have spoken so powerfully on this matter. And I cannot possibly compete with the power of their words, because there is nothing anyone can suffer more than the loss of a child. But I just want to make one observation from my many years, some would say too long years, as Health Secretary with respect to this issue, and that is the impact on professionals. Because when you go around hospitals up and down the country and you ask the doctors, nurses and midwives what is the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to you in your professional career, almost invariably they will say it's when they lose a baby. And we often talk about the trauma for the families, and of course they are the primary victims in this situation. But we must never forget what are sometimes called the second victims, which are those doctors, nurses, midwives, professionals, who have to go home worrying that maybe if they'd done something differently, that baby might still be alive, who have to come back to work the next day, struggle on dealing with that incredible trauma. And in that situation, those professionals want nothing more than to be completely open and transparent and honest with the families, with their colleagues, about what happened, to make sure that lessons are learned and that that tragedy is never repeated again. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the NHS today, we make that practically impossible. People are terrified about the NMC, the GMC, the CQC, their trust. They're worried about being fired. They're worried about all sorts of consequences. And so the one thing that should happen, the one thing that everyone in that situation wants to happen more than anything else, which is that lessons are learned from that tragedy, is often the one thing that never happens at all. And let's remember, as the Shadow Minister said, we have 1,400 neonatal deaths every year. So that's about 4 every single day across the NHS. And the great tragedy, not just in the NHS, but in hospitals all over the world, is the fact that you can have a tragedy that could happen in Blackpool one day, and a month later exactly the same tragedy happening in Cornwall. And there has been not enough effort to try and share the learnings from those tragedies. And I want to commend the efforts of the government and my successor ministers for doing everything they possibly can to put this right and to make sure we really do become a learning organisation. But in truth, this is a very big job that is going to take a very long time, because it is in the end about changing culture. And we need, as the NHS, to look at other industries that have successfully changed their culture from a blame culture to a learning culture. The airline industry is the most famous, but the nuclear industry is another, the oil industry is another. And that job of changing culture, in the end, is the central responsibility if we are going to reduce the agony both for parents and for the professionals involved in the care of babies. But the most powerful way to change culture is to shout out loud and clear those human stories of the terrible, terrible loss involved, because that is the thing that promotes change. So let me finish by commending everyone involved in Baby Loss Awareness Week, the brave members of this House who have spoken out and given hope to many others that they are not alone, but also the many brave members of the public who have relived their own tragedies over and over again to try and promote change in this area, and also the ministers who have a heavy responsibility with respect to this agenda, but I know are taking it with the utmost of seriousness.